But everything I read said, all this is nothing. This is the finger pointing to the moon. It's not the moon itself. Practice is necessary. Experience is necessary. And they all talked about something, there was all the yoga teachings, all the Zazen instructions on meditation and mindfulness, and meditation and meditation and meditation kept cropping up. And then when, not long after the Beatles went to India with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and put, the word guru on the map and meditation on the map. So I took up that same practice, and it was transformative. My life changed radically.
So welcome back to the Consciousness of the Way. I'm so grateful to have my guest here today and dive deep into a mystical path of self-realization through all these different forms. It's an epiphany for many people, but it's specifically a Hindu path. He's a world-renowned author and spiritual teacher. I want to welcome to the podcast Philip Goldberg. How are you, my dear friend?
I am well, thank you. Thanks for having me with you.
Yes, it's always exciting to have this commune that presents itself when two energies oscillate and hold the same resonance. And then you get to experience the outcome, this symbiosis that goes back and forth between wisdom teaching and self-realization. So I would love you. I know you have many examples throughout the interweb of the definition of your journey, but if you could give someone and my audience an abbreviated sort of summation of how you got here right now.
Yeah, I always begin my podcast with the same question. So now it's on me.
Yes.
Well, in many ways, I was a child of the 1960s, and when I was in college, having been raised by atheists with no religion or spiritual orientation whatsoever, except to mock religion. When I was in college, and I was politically active and just very disillusioned with everything. One thing, every enthusiasm got busted somehow, one way or another, of lacking truth, lacking integrity, lacking inspiration. And the conventional wisdom just didn't hold up for me. So I was searching somewhat desperately at times. And in that context of the late 1960s, that subculture of what we call the counterculture was where I gravitated to, and where there was a lot of experimentation, both drugs and exploration through most. This is obviously long before the internet, and so we searched for our wisdom in bookstores and our friends' bookshelves and borrowed things and stole things. And in that context, I came upon the teachings that came to us from the East. First, Zen Buddhism, because, it was the beat poets were heroes of ours, and they were into Zen. And then the teachings that we think of as Buddhism and Hinduism that are essentially the strains of those traditions that were easily adaptable to Western culture and Western thinking. And I found those traditions illuminating. They blew my mind, actually. And I remember thinking, if this is what is called spirituality and for some people called religion, then I've been really misled. There's something here. There's something coming. I remember reading Alan Watts, who wrote about Taoism and Buddhism and Hinduism. And it seemed rational. It didn't seem like it was faith-based or superstitious or incompatible with science and clarity of, discerning thought. It was rational. And the proof of that was the brilliant Westerners like Alan Watts and Aldous Huxley and Joseph Campbell and all these rational, scholarly people who were transmitting these teachings to us in very understandable, rational terms. So I was drawn to it as, answers to the big questions I'd been searching for. But everything I read said, all this is nothing. This is the finger pointing to the moon. It's not the moon itself. Practice is necessary. Experience is necessary. And they all talked about something, there was all the yoga teachings, all the Zazen instructions on meditation and mindfulness and meditation and meditation and meditation kept cropping up. And then when not long after the Beatles went to India with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and put, the word guru on the map and meditation on the map. So I took up that same practice and it was transformative. My life changed radically as a result of the practices that come from the yoga tradition, most especially meditation. And that was the proof of the pudding to me. So I wanted to know more. I wanted to learn more. I got qualified as a teacher. And then years went by and I finally came around to realizing I was meant to mess around with words, both, as a speaker and as a writer. And that marked the course of the last few decades, both as a writer, a public speaker, a person who teaches. And the overarching theme has been this integration of East and West, of spiritual and material and so forth. So that's the relatively short version of how I came to be whatever it is I am.
That's amazing. It really is. It's a softening of what is something that I believe we come from a different or similar path. You might have had a few decades ahead of me, but the reality is today's conditioning is quite dramatic. It's like a drop a stone into the ocean and it turns into a tornado, and people are confronted with this thing they call their psyche that they believe is separate from everything else, and then of course becomes this introspective battle that is continual until otherwise noted, until someone identifies that it is not what it seems, finding teaching through yourself or myself. This is problematic for any seeker that wants to have an understanding of who they are.
And that's the ultimate search, is to know who we are and see it in a new light. And the very definition of the very asking of the question can be misleading. When you start saying, who am I? You usually mean, who is this person, this ego, this person inhabiting this body, and what is he meant to do in the world and all that. And that's important. Those relatively, the life in the world questions of who we are, those have to be answered too. But the ultimate question of who we are transcends all that. And that's, the discovery that one comes to, and that has to be integrated into what we call real life.
Right. It's funny because I have many friends that are Buddhist monks. As you know, it's a slightly different variable to a Taoist path. It can be the same, but it depends on which sex or where you're standing in the world. There's so many variables of everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
But generally speaking, all my Buddhist monk friends have a very similar directive, which is observe the distortion, the dukkha, and dissolve it, and sit on that watchtower waiting for more of the same. And that to me is a little uneventful. I want to go a little deeper. And they're like, Don, the avatar can just be a throwaway and we're on to the next journey. And I agree. I agree. Generally speaking, from a Taoist path within the teaching I share, it's very much about immortalizing this very moment within. It's what we call bringing immortality, crystallizing it into a material state.
Well, let's look at what you just said. You were talking to monks.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a monk.
Yeah.
You're a married man from, just you mentioned your wife earlier. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a crucial thing, because one of the things I learned early on was most of the gurus who came here, not all the Buddhist teachers, but some, and almost all the Hindu-oriented gurus who came, were renunciates. They were swamis. They were, and some of the monks were renunciates. The Buddhist monks, and there were some householders. And one of the things I learned early on is the distinction between the renunciate path and the orientation of a monk living in a seclusion in an ashram or whatever. And the practices they do, the demands on them by their teachers. There's a big difference between that and the pathway of the bulk of humanity who are living in the world, having jobs and families and worldly concerns. And those pathways are different. And the practices they use are in large part different. And the orientation towards spiritual development has to be different. But sometimes they leak into one another. So the renunciate teachers, the monks, teach as monks to us householders, and sometimes it's not a good fit. And because if you think the only way to enlightenment or awakening is by renouncing and becoming a monk, and you apply their way of life and their practices to your way of life, and you're busy raising a family and trying to make ends meet and keep a job, it's very different. And so, making that distinction is very important. And sometimes, people get sidetracked by seeing things the way a monk might, and it doesn't apply to us in the world.
I mean, it's fascinating because I reference it being ordained in 2 lineages of Taoism myself as a priest. It's a different path because we're not limited by what is the human condition, which is generally a framework. We deep dive into the alchemy. So that's where most of my friends are just null and void. They're not interested in the potential of this material state. Yet this is a very much the first pillar of understanding and remembering who you are through this material so that you can show evidence. I mean, I think the experiencer, more than anything, from psychological to a belief system to a knowing, the evidence is most important to self-realization, because without it, you just get a transitory state of delusion that you stay in this cycle. And, 30 years ago, when I was doing exorcisms on people, they would be in a psychological disorder, a loop where they cannot get out of, an understanding that they have a connection with a higher self. They're hearing a very deep presence that is outside of them, that's returning to inside of them. And it would be diagnosed as a psychological disorder. But once liberated through the alchemy, you're exercising. Exercising is just liberating. That's all it is. A lot of people have this, very ominous, dark reference point to what that means. And it's determined by the individual seeker and experiencer that brings forth what they're materializing and creating in their own reality through that. So for me, it's just yin and yang. As a Taoist, it's always yin and yang. Yin is the absorption of all colors. Yang is the emission of all colors. And your mission, if you choose to accept it, Ethan Hunt, is to find that center point. And that center point is what we call the unification, or within Taoism, we refer to it as the Wu Ji, which is the void. And the void is the animation behind the consciousness. The consciousness is the animation to the spirit. The spirit is the animation to the energy. The energy is the animation to the body. And as you start to cultivate these very tangible evidence through the alchemy, you become expansive, and all bets are off as to what the potential possibility is, but you enter it at your own curiosity. It's not something that you're not going to be living a mundane reality, as most of my Buddhist monk friends would call it, and expect something supernatural to take place. You're going to just get more of the same.
Interesting stuff.
And what are your thoughts on that?
It's hard for me to, this is the language you're using, and the orientation is somewhat new to me. So it's hard to respond to, but because I would have a million questions.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, except you're supposed to be interviewing me.
Yeah. That's fine. It always, somehow, for some strange reason, it always ends up this way. It's a healthy conversation, because most people tend to propagate Taoism as this dusty, old, miserable life of
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, most of my students come from the native landscape, China, and parts of Asia, and they come out here and they train with me, and they're like, I've never come across a Taoist temple. And like that charge you and I are getting from that unity is an elated state of unification. And I see it, I experience it, I feel it. This is a knowing. This is part of the alchemy and the substance that my parapsychologist friends would call psychokinesis. This is evidence. That chill is evidence of the truth that goes beyond the simplicity of words.
Well, it's true that I'm fairly well informed, but I was not aware of this aspect of the Taoist tradition, of what you're calling alchemy and manifestation and worldliness. Most of us who have any exposure to Taoism, it's, we read the Tao Te Ching, when we're young and experienced and seeking. And it's, that's such a beautiful work, and it's so easy to be inspired by it. And I always saw it as very parallel to the non-dual teachings that were born in India, the non-dual Buddhist teachings, the Advaita Vedanta teachings, always very compatible. And it was people like Alan Watts who would comment on all of them that illuminated that for us. But like all the other teachings, in India has rich devotional practices and rich tantric traditions that are less well known, but are closer to what you're talking about. So, it sounds to me like, just as within, one of the core principles of spirituality that, I was drawn to it at first, and then that hit home, was that the divine, what we think of as ultimate reality, is both transcendent and one without a second, which is what Advaita means. It's all unity. But it's also immanent. So, this is divine, and this is divine, and this is everything is. It's both transcendent and right here in the material world. And so if you look at certain expressions of every mystical tradition, you'd think it's only unity and only oneness. And that's what the Tao Te Ching sort of points to, in a certain, if you interpret it that way. But then there's all these other teachings that come from it. All the, these esoteric yogic teachings and tantric teachings. And that sounds like the same thing exists in the Taoist world, where you're essentially using the material world and the world of forms and objects and gross and subtle, and in your terms, alchemizing them into divinity. Oh. You're spiritualizing the material world, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's all different gradients of that symbiosis, right down to a subatomic level, all the way up to flesh and blood that looks back at you in the mirror that you identify as yourself.
Were you trained in China?
Yeah, I trained in China. This particular alchemy goes way beyond the propagated, very simplistic outer sort of versions of Taoist alchemy that always starts with microcosmic orbit, which is very deficient. There's many little to no understanding of what that is in activation wise from the internal architecture, because you really do, you turn the lights on and they're never off. They become more and more potent from a second by second basis, which contradicts most people's understanding of an ascended state. When you embody this training, the evidence is on a second by second basis, and it's a permanence that would seem impossible, because what we call this is a point of no return. You detach to attach, so you now have imperium, dominion. You are maestro to this very fabric we call the primordial mother, the void. So now with your attention intention, that charge you're getting right now, you're picking up what I'm putting down. This is the now moment. And that is what we call Wuji. And furthermore, to see more evidence from a seeker, we refer to this as Wu Wei.
I was going to just ask you if Wuji, what you just call Wuji, is that, how does that relate to Wu Wei, which is the term I'm familiar with?
Right. Wuji is the stillness, which is the void, right? That's the primordial mother. That's the fabric to everything. Now, what happens is you create with your attention intention a version of your reality, creating distortion, and we use this currency called electromagnetism. So now you're, as you put it, this is energy. This is energy. It's all being transmuted into something that is from perfection, but carved into a distorted state that has this dance between electric and magnetic, which is dualistic. And as you have a path of non-dualism or non-centric, I mean, these are terms that are used within a spiritual path of understanding the makeup of this fabric. This is where we carve from that and create things that are energy, which is the currency of this material state, even though it's transmuted down to a subatomic level. So what we would then go, okay, energy potential is vibratory, it's frequential, and holds resonance. That resonance is now a cultivational practice that is met. That, you know, when you experience the presence of a yogi or someone that has spent many, many, many years in cultivation, they don't have to speak. Your body will attune to the profound resonance that they have cultivated through their lifetime. And this is where manifestation, magic, healing, however you want to define it, you will see something that will be beyond your spectrum of what is considered reality. Furthermore, it will turn into supernatural, superhuman, which we refer to as supernormal. This is how you form that, but it can happen only in the present moment. I've never witnessed a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual healing beyond that, because I am ultimately, many practices would refer to it as an observer, yet I'm the now moment. I'm no place, no person, no thing. I'm every place, every person, everything, And that refers back to what we call the bellows effect within reality. We are contracting and expanding at the same time. You're all things and nothing at the same time. Then we come back to the Wu Ji, which is your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to enter that center point of unification. And that will show evidence. So, within a Taoist path, it starts with the spark of divinity, which is desire. Desire moves into inquiry. Inquiry then creates contemplation. Contemplation drives curiosity. Curiosity is then growing and blossoming what we call hopium. It's potent hopium. And hopium, it blossoms into belief system. Now, this is where you're at a crossroads from a seeker, because your belief system will be met with your experience. So your experience will continue to validate and reinforce what you consider a knowing. This is where there's problematic issues with the seeker, because if you perceive reality as half empty, your glass is half empty, then this is what you will be given more of within the mirroring effects of the universe. If you perceive the glass as half full, then you will see more of the same. And that is the part where people within Taoism, we look at it, when you're at your lowest, you're really at your highest. Get past the semantics of a psychological condition profile and realize that that is distortion and not reality. The reality is your ability to access this flow, as Bruce Lee would have said back in the 70s, flow like water, my friend. That is the true, which is a throwaway word for many people these days, because they just throw it away. There's no evidence. And I'm a Pepsi challenge guy from the 80s. Show me, I'll take the Pepsi taste test with anybody. Show me what it is that you are sharing with the world. And I need evidence, because this is the tuning fork. The barometer to your reality is the flesh. But you have to get to a point of what you consider non-dualist, non-centric state of realization. Does that make sense?
Yes. And my mind always goes to parallels in other traditions. And, ultimately, when you said glass half full, glass half empty, I'm thinking, and then the ultimate reality is to realize that neither emptiness nor fullness matters or counts, and that they're both the same.
And that's, that's that mimicking resonance, right? When I teach someone alchemy, they embody that. And the function of the 9 Dantians between the earth and the universe is a great starting point for anyone. But all of a sudden, their life becomes serendipitous, synchronistic. And it's like, it can't be this simple. Oh, yes, it is.
It sounds to me, and I could be totally wrong, that just given the language you're using, you could just be using English equivalents to old Taoist terminology.
Yeah.
Or you could also be bringing in some Western metaphysics.
Well, there's Taoist metaphysics. There's an understanding of I have one of the biggest cores, if you go through the Taoist canons, through the humanistic timeline that goes back 6,000 BC, when we were integrating some type of ledger that would refer to pictographs and oracle bone reading, before we started to integrate what is now considered a language within the Chinese culture, referring to its simplified or traditional Cantonese to Mandarin, 2 of the same, half a dozen of the other, because it's an interpretive sort of thing when it comes down to tonality. And there's so many variables throughout the Chinese landscape, from province to one province to another. You're literally meeting this unique language that doesn't even make sense to either one of the integrations. But ultimately, that will refine itself from when you speak about it. One of the first experiences I had over 36 years ago was I channeled my teacher Latsu, which led me to becoming an ordained priest. And when you go down to the path of all this teaching, all this wisdom teaching, it all comes back to someone had an epiphany. They'll either confess that they channeled the information, they know it didn't come from within themselves. It was what someone would be, a throwaway word these days would be a download. No. Mm-hmm. And so my curiosity to understand how I access this from past lives whether you believe in incarnation or reincarnation, we can go down that path. Then it set me on the path of being ordained in two lineages of Taoism that then put me very clear on, through the tutelage of Lao-Tzu, which he's communes with me on a second-by-second basis. I don't claim to know anything. I'm as dumb as rocks. But the information is transmuted through me at some sort of legible coherence that people can understand. This is where I transcribed the Tao Te Ching last year with him. Normally, whenever I sit and listen and just transcribe, it turns into, I can do a 600-page book in about 24, 48 hours. And this is where the information, I'll send you a copy of the Tao Te Ching that Lao-Tzu entered into the interweb in the year 2024. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. It'll be very different to one you may have read before, because in my opinion, it comes directly from source, but so does everything. And it comes down to, how do you resonate to make it as such? But, that's the spirit world that we're in. This is their world. We're just living in it.
Fascinating. Let me ask you a question. Is there, in Taoism, as you understand it, are there teachings or concepts consistent with what we think of as karma?
That's a very interesting question, because how the magic grid that we laid down within our star stepping, which is a very ancient ritual that I teach people how to cultivate, which commands the intimacy with the whispers of the universe, and we're mirroring the constellation on planet Earth, normally within a platform that would be contemporary enough to understand. That's why across the Chinese landscape, we have hundreds of pyramids with the tips lopped off for the very purpose of star stepping magic. And so we can go really deep on that. But in essence, when it comes down to, hang on, what was the question again? I think I got lost on that.
Karma.
Oh, yes. So we use karma specifically to return people to whole. So when we're
say that again.
Karma is specifically used to return someone to whole, because you know what you know, you don't know what you don't know. So when we lay down a magical grid, which wraps and basically wraps the whole material state, when we're entering those numbers that ascend to 9 within that magical grid, there's 9 points, using the star stepping of the constellations, we will use that energy to whatever the purpose is. Whatever someone comes to you, I need this to take place within this and this and this. It's like, okay, well, the difference is when we lay these energies down, what the actual surrounding environment that would be considered impossible permanence, because you have free will and that everyone has their own path and their own self-realization, that you can't possibly be able to alter the fabric of reality using these type of magical tools. I can tell you that's fundamentally very wrong, because karma in of itself is the conditioned, introspective, inverted effects of yin within a material state that is transmuted from their spirit we call Shen. And so this is part of the path that you are walking within your own seeking. Everyone has the ability to return to that, yet some may consider that their path has given them the green light to continue the suffering and the pain, which is part of what generally most people consider karma, because with every cause and effect, you are creating your own rollout of what will be conditioned within your reality.
Yeah. So that's very consistent then with what Hindus and Buddhists would think of as karma.
Right. So when we lay the energy down, we return everyone that's within that ecosystem of, say, for example, you have a particular point and you have an origin point, then you have a directive, and the mandate goes to the other end. When you lay the energy down, everyone becomes whole. So hang on, what does that really mean? It means that resonance will return everyone to whole. So someone that may be met with their very, very limited perception and their suffering, are being reminded of this potency through the energy that they have the ability. And will not come with the evidence that someone comes up to you and goes, listen, someone just cast this magic on you. No, you will wake up and feel whole and feel satiated from a subatomic level where there's no cracks. And all of a sudden you might have had a mental or psychological disorder and you've been given a sample of this. Now, will it hold? It will hold to redirect the energy. That's what feng shui is about within our magical practices. You change and redirect the energy, but it's never met in the way that it's to diminish someone else's experience. Everyone has the same experience in relation to that energy. So you may meet it as we receive this charge right now. We're meeting the same resonance. Now, do you have the container to hold it? So you get a taste. It's like what we call the taste of the spiritual dragon. You get bitten by it. Does that make sense?
I think so. All right, I have another question for you.
Yeah.
Where does traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture fit into this framework, if it does at all? My wife's an acupuncturist.
Yeah, I mean, traditional Chinese medicine, over the years, I've had hundreds of doctors of Chinese medicine, acupuncturists. This is the watered down sort of like what we would call within the Chinese culture, the rice bowl version of Taoist alchemy. Now, if I go right back to one of my teachers, the Yellow Emperor, who will give me deep insight into the creation of the Chinese culture as we know it, there's many evidence within that timeline, and I just get it firsthand from him. But there's many evidence. If you look into Taoist canons, there's so much evidence of his initial spark of divinity and his whispers of the universe that magnetized him for 18 days and nights on planet Earth and was basically given the blueprint to Chinese culture as we know it, which refers to the intimate relationship with Taoist alchemy. And so the bleeded effect of that would be, more, infantile versions like Qigong, Chinese medicine. They work and they don't work. I Ching, the only thing I've ever seen that has the same power that mirrors the primordial mother is what we call the magical register, which is the Tao Te Ching. And so when you're experiencing the Tao Te Ching, it's an experience. So when each verse is not a verse, it's a living scripture. So each verse is an incantation. Mm-hmm. It is an invocation. It will instantly bring you back to whole. And everyone that reads the one that I transcribed is like, holy crap. This is potent because it is visceral. It's kinesthetic. It's somatic. It's not just reading empty words that I translated this and I threw it on there. And, I mean, because it's always open to interpretation, the Tao Te Ching. And so this particular foundational conditioning that you get from anyone that I teach, you start with the Tao Te Ching, and each incantation has 81 levels of consciousness, plus a frequency, a color, and a shape that takes the seeker into an embodiment and a knowing. And as they read it, it's evoking this wholeness that expands. So all the cracks within them that might be mental, emotional, physical, start to return to whole. And they're like, oh my goodness, I feel sedated.
That's very interesting. And I'm guessing that if you were to, this notion that the Tao Te Ching is, the verses are meant to be incantations.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, I'll read an English translation of something attributed to Buddha or to one of the Indian sages. And you find a lot of repetition. And people say, why did he repeat himself so much? And I'm thinking, I'll bet in the original language, that was an incantation. And the sound quality, the vibratory quality, because when you read the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads or the Diamond Sutra, and then you hear it, even though you don't understand it in the original language. I also once heard the Lord's Prayer, that Christians recite. I heard it in the original Aramaic. Didn't understand what it was, but I said, oh, the sound of that, the vibration of that, that's special. So I'm guessing something similar to what you just are talking about, those original languages where in Sanskrit, in Hinduism, they use the term namarupa, where the name and form are one.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'll bet that sounds like that.
You know, if you're curious, I'll send you a copy of my Tao Te Ching, and you will experience that, my dear friend.
Even though it's English.
Yeah, well, it's English, Pinyin, and Mandarin. So I've made it available in every aspect so that you were able to experience it at its fullest.
Okay, that's fascinating.
You can sing it in English, you can sing it in Pinyin, and if you can read Mandarin, because I made it as simplistic as possible. I mean, conventionally, most people really operate in Cantonese, which is just a more ancient traditional script. And so those characters are more robust and really bring you back. It's that dance between yin and yang, and you really feel it. And when you read that, it's unified, and you're like, holy moly! I don't need to even understand it. I can literally look at it and go, this is beyond words, as it should be, because that's an indicator of the true potency of what you're walking, which is that visceral, kinesthetic, somatic response. This is part of the conditioning within any system, is a developed self-realization that can be repeatable. That's why it's so potent for many speakers of divinity that have referred to themselves as gurus or masters or whatever. There's evidence of that. Their resonance precedes them. You don't need to say anything. And that's where people are like, oh my goodness, I just sat in the presence of this bloody blah, blah, and I'm as high as a kite. And I am, energy has always been the thing that sparked my curiosity within this lifetime. And that's why I embodied it so easily and then integrated the yin aspect of it so that I could really meet the potency of what someone would call an intuitive state of awareness, that the offspring of that is, clairvoyance, mediumship, channeling, all that kind of good stuff, but never be twisted that is part of your expansive state of awareness. When I see a student that gets literally obsessed by one mastered state, we need to have a conversation, because it's part of your realizing and returning to whole. And so everything within this state comes to a form of completion and then rebirth. And you have the ability to access that at any point. It's the mastery of the alchemy that makes it possible, so that it's repeatable for you. And of course, furthermore, you don't go down that transitory delusional state of, it's in my mind, it's a psychological thing. You need to surround yourself, as you know, you've been on this journey teaching people for decades, what it was, as the Beatles literally were a catapulting, spearheading, Eastern, philosophy and cultural spiritualization through the lens of different ways. And furthermore, the conditioning and limitation of Taoism over all these decades has been very much to do with the controlled environment that, we suffered that as a Chinese culture back in, I think it was the 40s or 50s, with Mao just literally committing the worst heinous case of genocide that you've ever imagined, just because he was bored. And people seem to forget, as the heinous crime of, World War II and Hitler, these people, they meet their swords. How do they meet their swords? I always tell them, these type of megalomaniacs that have literally got no off switch, that are not met with empathy, which is the most potent superpower any human being has, is when they finally realize that, as you put it, that they really believe in karma, it shows it to them. And whatever they've put out comes back in, because this is a conditioning. And then, of course, their megalomaniac behavior, they fall on their own sword, and it's layered in all this sort of like unraveling. And ultimately, that sweet tune, that nectar that we call the divine primordial mother, the wholeness, God, Buddha, Tao, universe, it will always show itself, no matter how heinous you believe that humanity has drawn to its lowest point. It will always come back to whole. And it's unfortunate that we have to experience some of these things.
Yeah, I was going to say they get a lot of damage is done along the way,
Right.
and right now it couldn't happen too soon. But human beings being what we are, it seems to work out that way.
Well, I mean, that's the path of a Taoist, right? The ultimate goal of ascension. I always tell people, hey, your gift is your offering. My students are like, but Jifu, I want to learn the levitation, the healing, the energy, the pyrokinesis, the telekinesis. Listen, these are all side effects. That's fantastic. I'll give you the roadmap. But what's most important for me is to make sure you are in the flow and your river is not being obstructed by any sort of detours. And so that comes with a self-realization. Well, what does that mean? So here's an incantation from one of my teachers, the Jade Emperor, that basically embodies that. And it's very simplistic. A power abundant in its giving you will receive. Unifying the body with the spirit with the energy, bringing heaven to earth, transcending all is one, one is all, revealing perfection manifest. That is your gift. That is your offering. That is your gift. That is your offering. That is your gift. That is your offering. And so when I have a student that's so eager to want to be the next Bruce Lee, or however you want to internalize and alchemize the internal alchemy, what you must never lose sight of is that simplicity, that you are in servitude, and that requires selflessness. And that is that point of selfishness to selflessness. There comes the sacrifice, and the sacrifice,
Very good.
The identity.
Very good. There's parallels in the traditions I've traversed as well. You're probably familiar with Yogananda and the autobiography of a yogi.
I've interviewed many practitioners of his wisdom teaching.
Okay, so I wrote a biography of Yogananda. You can see it behind me here.
Yeah.
And actually tonight, I start for the third time, I think, teaching a course going through the autobiography of a yogi. And I mention that because of all the teachers who came to the West and became famous, he wrote about and talked about what we would think of as miraculous psychic powers and supernormal attainments, and more than anybody. And people get distracted by that. And those who are drawn to those things, they want that. They want to experience that. They want to hear about it. But like Buddha and all the others who acknowledge that these things are real and these powers are attainable, and that the great masters exhibited them, they use them as teachings, and then they warn you not to get too caught up in it.
It kind of sounds exactly what I just said.
Yeah, it is. I was just giving you another example of what you just said.
So I love this.
They'll distract you. They'll distract you from what's really important, which is, your realization, your happiness, your bliss, your joy, your love, all the good things. And I have met people who get so distracted by materializing things and psychic powers and knowing what's going on and all these things, and they're not always happy. They're not integrated. They can't get their lives together in many instances. And if they had a good teacher around at that time, they say, go chop wood and carry water, do what you have to do.
Yeah.
Go within. Don't let these things are side effects.
It is, and most people, it's an initial spark of inquiry and desire that I want to see more of this. This shows me beyond the parameters of what I perceived as reality is something else. So that's always a great entry level on
That's
the
right.
yellow brick road.
It
But
gets your attention.
yes, and I love that. I mean,
Yeah.
I've come across 3 people in my lifetime that can levitate. 2 of them were Indonesian Kundalini masters from the jungles of Indonesia, and the third was one of my students. And people are like, "Well, hang on, Jifu. Well, how come you're not levitating?" Or because I don't give a shit. I'm part of my French. I don't care. And this is
Yeah.
the very problem. For me, what it incites me or excites me to get back to my childlike state where accept everything at face value. This is something that is a cautionary tale because many people cannot just surrender to the present moment. They're mitigating, they're deciphering of what am I getting out of this, as opposed to the selflessness and servitude is the default that will come with a true ascended person that has realized that the person is the avatar, the vehicle, but the ascended state of that resonance will require no participation from them.
Yeah. And if I've been to India a lot. I met many gurus and swamis and so forth. And sometimes you hear about somebody and the people say, "Oh, and he can do this, and he's," and I just meet some of them and I think, are they kind? Do they laugh? Are they joyful? That to me is the evidence. The other stuff is trickery, and it doesn't necessarily mount very much.
No, it's correct. And so when I refer to that, those people are mastered in the energy potential of this material state, but they're very deficient. Their personalities are corrupted. And so they're not ascended. They've been going on their path and they stopped off at one bus stop and they're just staying there. That doesn't make them, or they don't come back to being whole. They're stagnant.
Yeah.
And it presents an issue because what happens is, as you mentioned before, the someone will wake up. Like this happens to me all the time. I get someone who wakes up and they see grandma, they hear voices, they've got vivid dreams, they've got predictions, they can read auras, all this kind. I'm like, that's fantastic. This is your first evidence from your Sherlock to your Watson that there's something else.
That's
Now,
right. That's right.
Let's expand on that. And they get fixated on the one thing. I am a clairvoyant. I am a healer. And that's great. But what happens is, the inverted effects of that is you absorb too much yin within this material state. You're not staying in the center point of unification. And evidence will be mortality. Evidence will be psychosis. Evidence will be mental and emotional chaos.
Yeah.
So these people are, I'm a healer, yet in the confines of their own mind, they are losing their proverbial shh. And that's the evidence. You will see it. Yeah. So that will come more in a transmuted effect. The flesh, they will be struggling with their own body weight issue. There's many different things that will show themselves as it starts to transmute through the body.
That's very good. I often think of people like that as savants, like a musical savant or a mathematical savant or something. They have this special skill, this special gift and talent, but they're not necessarily balanced, personalities in real life. And there's value in that. And sometimes, earning capacity, but it's not spiritual fulfillment and the subtle, juicy, good stuff that ultimately we're all after, of awakening and happiness and joy and love. I've seen a lot of people who suddenly awaken to psychic powers and stuff, And often the relationships suffer.
Yeah. I mean, because you're operating in this material state. So there's going to be the polarizing effect. Your needle's going to go one way or the other. Your ability to merge the two from a psychological perspective, obtain consciousness, which would be conscious and unconscious process. This is a developed skill. And so don't be, distracted by, your mental, emotional state, and then realizing that is not the truth. And so then you start to become inverted and it starts to transmute itself. It'll either be too much yang, too much yin, and then the physical body mortality will show itself. And many of the people that I came up with 30 plus years ago, they're all dead. Students, teachers, because they don't understand that when you want to cultivate and refine your resonance with that unification of the primordial mother, that doesn't require you. So this avatar is an anchor to your conscious immortality within this space. Treat it as such, which is where my Buddhist friends, we separate. They'll trash the avatar and go off in their merry good way, whereas a Taoist alchemy is to prolong the longevity within this incarnation. So to enrich the physical body is to have dominion, have maestro over the energy potential. That would then transmute into things that were more commonly conventionally accepted within physics or science, things like epigenetics and neuroplasticity and brain waves and things of that nature that will show itself as this potency. And that's kind of how I see it.
Sounds good.
Yeah. It's I think it's fascinating when we all come together and realize that you say tomato, I say tomato, and it all comes back to the same point of self-realization.
Yes, and that's where I always come back to. There's going way back to the Rig Veda. I always forget the Sanskrit, but it's usually translated as "truth is one, the wise call it by many names," and it's essentially a testament to oneness. And all the metaphors that are used, like there are many paths up the mountain, but the view at the top is the same once you get there. There are long paths, there are shortcuts, there are windy paths, dangerous paths, comfortable paths, but they all lead to the same mountaintop. There's all these metaphors. You can get up to the roof by the steps, by, climbing up the walls, whatever. But once you're at the top of the roof, you're all there at the same. And I always think all this, people argue, scholars argue about these fine points of things. And I'm in touch with a lot of academics, and they're always like, yeah, but Hinduism says this and Buddhism says that and that. And, I always think somewhere, Lao Tzu and Shankara and Buddha and all these people are just all hanging out together, laughing at all that nonsense. They're just having a good time in their oneness, and their different languages are just colorful differences within the oneness. And that's what happens when you hang around with real practitioners of spirituality. You find these commonalities in spite of the languages, in spite of the belief system, in spite of the cultural differences, all this stuff. But when they talk about their experience of divine or spiritual awakening, it's the same thing.
Whenever Lao Tzu is always asked the question, why me? And his answer is, why not? What is my purpose? It's determined by this now moment. Or furthermore, he'll go into, imagine you're like a grain of sand, asking the beach, what are we doing today? Fall back into the beach and be realized. And then I'm like, what? I'm observing and experiencing this wisdom teaching real time, and it's like, I don't look like a bag of rocks. I actually look like I've got something substantive that's coming out of my mouth that could give someone an epiphany, a moment of self-realization. And that is the potency of this stuff. But I regress to that moment where I said the deficiency of the practitioner is when they get caught up in one superpower. What it does is it draws on the physical body. Within Taoism, we have Qing, which is constitution. It's a battery pack you come into. You could be your hereditary disposition, whatever. You can cultivate the alchemy to bring yourself up to 100% of battery capacity. And then through that alchemy, you go up to 1,000, 9,000%. And then you no longer rely on an absence of this flow. And so you access the Wu Ji, the primordial mother, never tapping into your life force. This is where most healers, acupuncturists, Chinese medicine doctors, light workers, blah, 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 blah. They're like, oh my goodness, I'm so exhausted at the end of the day. I can only do so many healings. Because you're selling what I call selling your soul. Your essence is wherever your attention is, which is the most valuable commodity. Your intention will then take what is this physical flesh. Instead of realizing that embodiment, you never return to your body, and that creates longevity. And within the Taoist alchemy canons, we go back 300, 400, 500. They've got evidence of people that have lived 1,000 years old within the teaching. And for me, I remember distinctly one of my teachers at the monastery I was at in China. He was 84 years old, a living immortal, and considered a living mortal within our sect. And so he was at the front of all these priests, and he came off a stage and he tripped. He was 84, 85 years old, and he was going for the ground. Now, fragility as your human body starts to, let go of this energy, you get older, and the end result is moving right along. You can't hold that, containing that energy. So as he's falling to the ground, one of the priests just dived out like they were catching a football and broke his fall. He got up, and his first answer was, "Thank you, Tao," and then walked right along, because he already knew he was given the written story. He knows the story. He knows the answer, and now it's just embodying and being in the present moment to live it. If that makes sense.
Yep. And here we are in these fragile bodies, and at the same time, eternal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the paradoxes of life on a spiritual path that just always amuse me when I'm not struggling with them, and I could step back and look at these what seem to be contradictions. We're material beings, and yet we're infinite at the same time, and we have these little weird bodies and these strange personalities, and yet we're these divine beings as well. And that's I think that realization of that is so tickling. It's one of the reasons that the gurus and the genuine spiritual masters that I've met, they're sometimes the goofiest people. They find it all very amusing. And when I run into serious spiritual seekers who are a little overly earnest and lose their sense of humor, I always try to remind them that this is serious business, spirituality, but it's also a hoot, man. It's a sitcom. And it's wacky.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you want to find enlightenment, just look to a child. You'll find everything you need. I mean, I have 6 children on my own, and part of a Taoist path is the unified state of a family is normally 9, including parents. So I'm close. I'm close. One more, and we'll get to that 9 point of ascended state of completion. And people, again, another transmuted state, numerology, how potent that is within Taoism.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I have to leave in a minute or two, but the number 9 and multiples of number 9 in that tradition is fascinating.
Well, you can bring it right back to the circumference of planet Earth, the sun, everything, the distances. You will find that number in everything. It will repeat with either in 9 or 18. And you're like, you can't make this stuff up, because when you hit the 18 point, this is the culmination of yin and yang, and it's completing and then rebirthing at the same time. And you show that evidence, that pulpability that we're having right now is our unity.
And you know, in India, 108 has special meaning, and they have different reasons for that. But my familiarity with Chinese medicine and the number 9, I think, well, that's 12 times 9 also. So
that's the highest point of ascension, like for activating energy potential between the earth and the universe through that alchemical process. You'll hit 108 Dantians, which is the energy elixir field. Now that's like super stupid. Like I can activate 27 for anybody's self-realization, and they're going to be superhuman. Like they're going to do things that would potentially be absurd or unobtainable. And what happens is you're in lack of nothing. And the ultimate end goal is servitude and selflessness that does not require you interrupting through your personality. It happens through the cultivational practice that doesn't require your attention. And then all of a sudden, I want for nothing. I am whole. I am just being right now. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's been just fantastic having a conversation, my friend. I look forward to part 2 at some point. I hope.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks for inviting me. It's been illuminating and a pleasure.
It's the pleasure's all mine, my dear friend. One last question. What's your definition of spiritual consciousness?
What, do you want that in one sentence or 25 words? Really?
Whatever you want to give me.
Oh, let's see. Spiritual consciousness. Well, I would say spirit is consciousness. Spiritual consciousness is the realization of our own infinity.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I want to thank you. I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for sharing their time with me. I am your humble servant and Sifu Taoist Master San Qing, and I'll see you on the next one, guys.